Autumn comes unnoticed in Yucca Valley. You just step out on your porch one morning and realize that the sun is no longer baking so relentlessly, and the air is filled with a soft coolness and the smell of drying desert vegetation. I've lived here for 34 years, and all those years I've welcomed fall on my porch with a cup of strong coffee. My name is Beverly Prescott. I am 67 years old, and for the last 20 of those years, I have lived alone. My husband left this world suddenly, a heart attack during a business trip, probably provoked by a young secretary with whom he shared a hotel room. That information never made it into the official records, but I always had my sources. Believe me, small towns keep secrets worse than a cracked dam holds water. I finished my coffee watching Mr. Brooks from across the street water his cacti. He's 81, but he still stands straight and proud. His military bearing has not faded over the years. Spotting me, he lifts his tattered hat. I nod in return, nothing more. We've maintained this neighborly formality for 2 decades now, and both of us are fine with it. Life in Yucca Valley flows slowly, like thick syrup. There is no hustle and bustle of big cities here, and everyone knows each other, at least by sight. I work as an accountant for a small law firm called Rogers and Associates. We specialize in land issues and wills. Boring? Maybe. But when you're in your 60s, you start to appreciate routine and predictability. My daughter Audrey doesn't see it that way. Mom, you've literally buried yourself in this hole, she said during a recent phone conversation. Audrey is 39, and she has never understood my choices. After her father died, she left to study in Los Angeles and didn't return to Yucca Valley until 11 years later, with a husband and shattered illusions about a career as an artist. I set my empty cup on the porch railing and walk back into the house. It's time to get ready for work. My small one-story house is as simple and functional as I am. Living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, bathroom, nothing too fancy. The pictures on the walls are the only thing that can tell an outsider about my life. Here's my husband Richard and me on our wedding day. Here's little Audrey on her first bike. School pictures, graduation, my daughter's wedding, the usual family timeline. But I have other photos too. The ones stored in a locked desk drawer in the bedroom. The ones that remind me of the times before Yucca Valley, before Richard, before my role as the good mother of the family, of a time when my name was very different. My cell phone vibrates, a message from Hennessy. Your order has arrived. You can pick it up after 4. Hennessy owns a small, rare bookstore on the outskirts of town. At least that's what the sign says. In fact, it does carry books, but his main business is in a different area altogether. He helps people find things that don't want to be found. Information, things, sometimes people. And he never asks questions if the price is right. I reply with a short, okay, and head to the bathroom. The mirror reflects a woman with short cropped gray hair, sharp facial features, and attentive gray eyes. They say I was beautiful when I was young. It doesn't matter now. Beauty is an overrated asset, especially when you realize how the world works. On my way to work, I take a small detour past Audrey's house. It's become a habit of mine over the past 2 years, since she married Nat Vincent. I never go in, just drive by. Sometimes I notice her watering the flowers on the porch or loading things into the car. Today, the yard is empty, the curtains are drawn. I haven't seen my daughter in 3 weeks, not since that Sunday lunch that ended in another fight. You're too controlling, Mom. Nat says you're trying to run my life even now, she said then, rising abruptly from the table. And I stayed silent. Didn't mention that her precious Nat was a pathological liar with debts all over the place. I didn't mention that I'd seen him leaving a motel on the edge of town with some blonde. I didn't show him the reports Hennessy put together for me. My daughter is a grown woman, and she's made her own way. Everyone in our family learns from their mistakes. except mistakes come in many forms. Some cost too much. The Rogers and Associates office is in a small two-story building on Main Street. I park in my usual spot and nod to Elaine Draper, the mayor's secretary, who walks by. She stops, adjusting her glasses on her nose. Beverly, long time no see. How's Audrey doing? I hear they're showing her paintings in a Santa Barbara gallery now. In small towns, everyone knows your business better than you do, especially if it's not true. Good morning, Elaine. I'm afraid you're confused about something. Audrey hasn't painted in a long time. Elaine looks embarrassed. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just Nat was telling me at the hair salon that she was invited to an exhibition. Typical of Nat, making up stories about non-existent successes to maintain the image of a well-to-do family. 5 years ago, when they first met, Audrey had actually tried to promote her work, to no avail. The California art world wasn't ready for her strange, desert-inspired abstractions, or maybe her talent just wasn't bright enough. Either way, the brushes and paints have long been gathering dust in a closet. Nat has a tendency to embellish, I say dryly. I'm sorry, Elaine. I have to go. The reports aren't going to make themselves. The office is empty and quiet. I'm the first to arrive and the last to leave, another habit Mr. Rogers appreciates. He shows up around 10, nods at me, and disappears into his office. He's 72, and for the last few years he's been more preoccupied with his antique gun collection than with the affairs of the firm, which is fine with me. An accountant's work is predictable and methodical. Numbers don't lie, unlike people. I check accounts, reconcile balances, fill out tax forms. The day stretches slowly and measuredly, like all the previous ones. At lunchtime, I eat a sandwich brought from home while watching the news on my tablet. Nothing special. The usual stories about politics, disasters, and human stupidity. Around 3, Paige Holloway walks into the office, one of the few people I can call a buddy, if not a friend. She works at the insurance company across the street, and sometimes we have lunch together. Ready for dinner tomorrow night? She asks, taking a seat on the edge of my desk. I wrinkle my nose. I'd completely forgotten. Monthly girls' dinners are a tradition Paige has kept for years. Several women our age gather at the restaurant, discussing books, complaining about their health, and gossiping about their neighbors. I usually find excuses, but this time I'm caught. Of course, Paige. I look forward to it. I lie without hesitation. She smiles, not believing a word of it. You're a terrible liar, Beverly. But you won't get away with it this time. There'll be Marge Turner, remember her? She just got back from a cruise and brought back some shocking news about Carol Sanders' husband. I nod with feigned interest. Gossip about other people's husbands is the last thing on my mind, especially since I already know Carol's husband is losing their life savings at an online casino. Hennessy mentioned it a month ago. With Paige gone, I get back to work, but my thoughts return to Audrey. Her marriage to Nat was a mistake from the start. He came into her life at a time when she was particularly vulnerable, after a series of professional setbacks and a breakup with a previous boyfriend. Nat, with his charming smile and grand plans, seemed like a savior. He talked about how he would start his own business, how they would travel, how he would support her creativity. The reality was different. Nat scraped by on casual wages, spending most of his time in bars or at his computer, supposedly developing business plans that never materialized. His promises to start a construction firm remained promises. And 2 months ago, Hennessy told me that Nat had started taking out loans in Audrey's name without telling her. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. At 4 o'clock, I get off work and go to Hennessy's. His store is in an old laundry building. Inside it smells of dust, old paper, and something chemical, a smell I always associate with mysteries. Hennessy is a thin man of indeterminate age, with thinning red hair and a perpetually wary gaze. No one in town knows where he came from or what his real name is. They say he was once a private detective or even a Secret Service agent. What is true is that he has connections all over the country and an amazing ability to extract information. Mrs. Prescott, he nods as I walk in. Your order is ready. He hands me an envelope, and without opening it, I place it in my bag. We both know what's inside is the latest on Nat's financial shenanigans and pictures of his meetings with his mistress. I pay cash, like I always do. There's one more thing, Hennessy says as I'm already turning to leave. He bought tickets, too, to Mexico for next week. I freeze, so this is more serious than I thought. Nat isn't just having fun on the side, he's planning an escape. And knowing him, I can assume he won't leave Audrey a dime. Thanks, Hennessy. Keep me posted. He nods. As always, Mrs. Prescott. By the way, if you need any special help, I have reliable contacts. I know what he's talking about. In a previous life before Yucca Valley, I wouldn't have hesitated. But now I prefer more subtle methods. Not required yet, but thanks for the offer. Leaving the store, I get in my car and open the envelope. The pictures are clear. Nat and a young woman with platinum hair coming out of a motel, getting into a car. In one photo, they're kissing. Her face seems familiar, but I can't remember where I might have seen her. The financial report confirms my worst fears. Nat withdrew almost all the money from the joint accounts and took out 3 loans in Audrey's name using a forged power of attorney. I close my eyes, breathing in the dusty Yucca Valley air through the ajar window. Well, at least now I have proof. It's just a matter of deciding what to do with it. Show Audrey? She might not believe it, or worse, forgive him. Go to the police? Sheriff Montgomery is an old friend of Richard's, but even he can't do much about a forged power of attorney without a statement from Audrey herself. No, we need a different approach, one I've used before in another life when my name wasn't Beverly Prescott. I start the car and drive home, mentally formulating a plan. I'm going to need the help of old acquaintances. Fortunately, some debts never have a statute of limitations. In the evening, I sit on the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight color the desert with golden hues. The phone in my lap is silent. Audrey hasn't called me since our last fight. Proud as I am of myself. But she'll have to come soon. If Hennessy's calculations are correct, Nat is preparing to deliver the final blow. And when that happens, my daughter will be left with no money, no home, and no husband. Perhaps it's for the best. Sometimes you have to lose everything to start a new life. I know that better than anyone. I finish my whiskey, looking up at the darkening sky. The stars over Yucca Valley always seem closer than anywhere else, like you can reach out and touch them. An illusion, of course, like so much in my life. Well, it's time to get ready. I can feel the denouement coming faster than I expected, and when Audrey knocks on my door in the middle of the night, I'll be ready. A plan is already forming in my head, clear, ruthless, and effective, just like the good old days. Tuesday was particularly tiring. There was a minor crisis at Rogers and Associates. An audit unexpectedly revealed discrepancies in the financial statements from 3 years ago. Mr. Rogers was in a panic. The assistants were frantic, and I had to deal with the figures until late in the evening. Fortunately, the error was a trivial typo, but it took me almost 5 hours to find it. I got home about 9 o'clock at night with the only desire to take a hot bath and forget myself in one of those boring detective stories I buy at the supermarket. A strange preference for a woman with my background, but there's something comforting about predictable plots, where the criminal is always caught and justice is served. Real life is more complicated. I put the kettle on, made a turkey sandwich, and opened the fridge in search of olives. Evening rituals help to organize life, to create the illusion of control. At my age, you begin to appreciate the little things. Hennessy hadn't contacted me in 3 days, which was unusual. He usually sent short updates every night, tracking Nat's movements. I considered calling him, but decided to wait until morning. Perhaps he just didn't have anything to report. The phone call broke the silence of the house, making me wince. Paige's name popped up on the screen. I sighed, probably wanting to remind me about the girls' dinner tomorrow night, which I'd almost decided to skip. Beverly? Paige sounded worried. I'm sorry to call you so late, but I think you should know. I just saw Audrey at the drugstore. She looked, upset, very upset. I tried to talk to her, but she just walked by without even noticing me. I gripped the phone tighter. Paige is not the type to panic over nothing. Thanks, Paige. I'll call her. I don't mean to intrude, but maybe you should just stop by and see her. I've really never seen her like this before. After a short conversation, I hung up and dialed Audrey's number. Beeps, beeps, voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Anxiety began to build. Not that my daughter and I had been particularly close in recent years, but the maternal instinct never goes away as we age. The decision came instantly. I would go to her. Our last fight paled before the potential problems. I threw on a light jacket, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Just then, the doorbell rang. Audrey stood on the doorstep. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were red from crying, and she was clutching a tattered bag in her hands. She looked like a frightened child, just as she had 30 years ago, when she'd fallen off her bike and shattered her knee until it bled. Mom, her voice trembled. Can I come in? I stepped back silently, letting her into the house. Audrey walked inside, threw her bag on the floor, and sank down on the couch, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to keep herself from collapsing. What's wrong? I asked, though I already guessed the answer. Nat, she swallowed, trying to deal with her emotions. He left me, took all the money, and disappeared. There it was. Finally, what I'd been waiting for and dreading at the same time happened. I sat down next to her, hesitant to hug her. It wasn't customary in our family to express tenderness physically. Tell me more about it. My voice sounded calm, almost detached. Years of practice. Audrey took a deep breath and began to speak. The story was banally predictable. When she returned home today after working at a local design firm, she discovered that some of Nat's things had disappeared. At first, she thought he was away on business, but something made her check their joint bank account. It was empty. All of their savings, almost $40,000, were gone. I tried to call him, but his phone was disconnected, Audrey continued, her voice growing more and more lifeless. Then I went to the bank. Turns out the money had been withdrawn yesterday, every last dime. And that's not all. She raised her reddened eyes to me. The house, our house, is in his name. I always thought we were co-owners, but the papers I signed, I never read them carefully. I trusted him. Trust. The most dangerous form of self-deception. I never trusted Nat from the first day Audrey brought him in to meet him. Something about his smile, the ease with which he made promises, made me uneasy. Old instincts, honed by years of working with people who had a lot of secrets. I also found this. Audrey pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of her pocket. In the trash can. He hadn't even bothered to properly dispose of the evidence. I unfolded the paper. A printout of an e-ticket. Cancun, Mexico. In the name of Nat Vincent and Laurel Townsend. Departure date is tomorrow. Laurel Townsend. Now I remember where I've seen that blonde in Hennessy's photos. She worked at a travel agency in a neighboring town. Young, ambitious, and apparently not too frugal. Do you know her? I asked, pointing to the name. Audrey grinned bitterly. Oh, yes. She helped us plan our wedding anniversary trip. Nat insisted we go with that agency. I can see why now. She sobbed again, deeper, more hopelessly this time. I finally made up my mind and put my arms around her. She snuggled up to me, like when she was a child, when the world seemed too big and scary. What am I going to do, Mom? I have nothing left, no savings. The house will probably be foreclosed on soon. My paintings, they're all over there in the studio. He knew what he was doing. He planned the whole thing. Of course he did. Men like Nat always plan. They pick a victim, learn their weaknesses, gain their trust, then strike. It's a classic pattern, and my own daughter fell for it despite all my warnings. You can stay here, I said, stroking her back. As long as it takes. Thank you, she whispered. But what's next? How do I start over at my age? There was such desperation in her voice that my heart sank. My strong, proud daughter, broken by the betrayal of the person she trusted most. In that moment, I felt something I'd long forgotten awaken in me, a cold, calculating rage, the same one that had once helped me survive in a world where women were easy prey. There's something you don't know, Audrey, I said slowly. I've suspected Nat for a long time, and I've been taking certain measures. She pulled away, looking at me with a puzzled expression. What do you mean? I stood up and headed for the bedroom closet. Opening the top drawer, I pulled out a weighty folder and returned to the living room. Audrey looked at me, wiping away tears. What's this? Evidence. I placed the folder on the coffee table. I hired a man to follow Nat about a year ago. After you mentioned his plans to invest your savings in some shady scheme. Audrey stared at the folder, hesitant to open it. You were spying on my husband? I was protecting my daughter. My voice hardened. And I was right. She opened the folder slowly. Inside were photos, financial statements, copies of loan agreements signed in her name, phone transcripts, everything Hennessy had collected for me over the past year. Audrey's face grew paler as she looked through the documents. It's a forgery, she whispered, pointing to the loan agreement. I never signed that one, and neither did this one. Oh my God, the amount of stuff he... 3 loans totaling about $60,000, I said. Plus he'd mortgaged the house, even though there was no mortgage on it in the first place. Audrey looked up at me in shock. But how? How could he do all that without my knowledge? It's easy to forge a signature if you have samples, and a power of attorney can be made retroactively, especially if you know the right people. How do you know all this? There was a hint of suspicion in her voice. I looked away. Some parts of my past are best left in the shadows, even for my own daughter. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we now have proof of his fraud. We can go to the police. Audrey shook her head, looking at the pictures of Nat with Laurel. Some of them looked like a couple in love, others like business partners discussing something at a cafe table. The police. She grinned bitterly. What would they do? Find him? Make him pay the money back? That would take months, if not years. And I need something to live on now. She was right. The legal system is slow, especially in cases like this. By the time it goes to trial, Nat and his girlfriend will have long since spent the money they stole. I have some savings, I said. Not a lot, but enough to help you get back on your feet. No. Audrey shook her head firmly. I'm not taking your money, Mom. I'm not a child anymore. I'll find a way to cope. Pride. It was a quality she definitely inherited from me. Sometimes it helps you survive. Sometimes it's an obstacle. There is another option, I said slowly, weighing each word. We can get back what's yours. How? She looked at me with a puzzled expression. He's already withdrawn all the money. Not all the money, I pointed to one of the reports in the folder. There's an offshore account. Hennessy discovered it a month ago. Nat transferred most of the money from the sale of your car and the loans there. About $100,000. Audrey's eyes widened. But how can we get to that money? We don't have access to the account. We don't, I nodded. But some people I know have, specific skills in these matters. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Who are you, Mom? Sometimes I feel like I don't know you at all. There was some truth in what she said. Audrey knew me only as Beverly Prescott, small town accountant, widow and mother. She didn't know the woman I used to be, the woman who could negotiate with the most dangerous men on the East Coast, a woman who disappeared one day to start a new life. I'm just a mother who wants to protect her daughter, I answered evasively, and sometimes you have to use unconventional methods to do that. Audrey was silent, digesting the information. I saw her eyes struggling with conflicting emotions: shock at Nat's betrayal, surprise at my revelations, fear of the unknown future. What do you suggest? She finally asked. First, you need to rest. I got up and headed for the kitchen. Have some tea, take a bath. The guest room is always ready for you, and in the morning we'll discuss a plan of action. Audrey nodded, suddenly looking very tired. I put the kettle on and took out the cups, trying to concentrate on simple actions. A hurricane of emotions raged inside me: anger at Nat for what he'd done to my daughter, concern for Audrey, and a strange excitement. A part of me, the part that had been buried beneath the layers of Beverly Prescott's ordinariness, was beginning to wake up. While Audrey showered, I dialed Hennessy's number. He answered after the first beep, as if he'd been expecting my call. I already know, he said without greeting. Vincent had withdrawn the last of the money from the visible accounts. He and his girlfriend are flying to Cancun tomorrow. I'm aware of that, I answered. Audrey is here at my place. She knows everything. Hennessy whistled. How's she holding up? She's hanging in there. She's stronger than she looks. She's like her mother in that, he said, a chuckle in his voice. What now? I thought about it for a moment. Remember that conversation about special help? I need contacts. Are you sure? His voice became serious. This isn't just surveillance anymore, Beverly. This is on another level. I know. My voice sounded harsh, even to myself. But some things can't go unpunished, especially when it comes to my family. Hennessy was silent for a moment. Then he said, Okay, I'll send you the information tomorrow morning. But remember, these people, they're not like the people you used to know. They play by different rules. Everybody plays by the same rules, Hennessy, I said. They just don't know it. After the conversation, I went back into the living room. Audrey was sitting on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket I'd kept since she was a little girl. Her hair was damp from her shower, and her face had a look of determination mixed with desperation. I want him to pay, she said, looking me in the eye. Not just with money. I want him to regret what he did. In that moment, I saw myself in her, the woman I'd been long ago, the woman willing to fight for what was rightfully hers. He'll pay, I promised, sitting down next to her. We'll take care of it. That night, lying awake in my bed, I thought about the paths that had led me to this moment, about the decisions made years ago, about a new identity created from nothing, about the daughter sleeping in the next room who never knew the truth about her mother. Maybe it's time for some secrets to come out. Not all of them. Some secrets must remain buried forever. But enough for Audrey to realize her mother isn't just a boring small-town accountant. And that revenge is an art I once mastered to perfection. I closed my eyes, letting plans form in my head. In the morning, I'll call a few people from my past life, those who still remember the woman I used to be, those who owe me favors. Nat Vincent made a fatal mistake. He hurt my daughter, and he would soon learn that some women don't forgive such mistakes, especially women with my past. I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to Audrey's quiet breathing from the next room. The clock on the bedside table read the beginning of the second night. The city outside the window was silent, with only the occasional distant barking of dogs and the rustle of occasional cars. My thoughts swirled around Nat and his betrayal. Anger throbbed somewhere deep inside, but on the surface there was a familiar calm. Emotions were a luxury I hadn't been able to afford in a long time, especially now when I needed to think clearly. I was about to doze off when I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. The door creaked open. "Mom?" Audrey's voice was barely audible. "Are you awake?" I turned on the nightlight. Audrey stood in the doorway, wrapped in an old robe she'd left here years ago. In the darkness, her face looked gaunt, her features sharpened. "Come in." I patted the edge of the bed. "Can't sleep either?" She nodded and sat down beside me, pulling her knees up to her chest, just like she'd done when she was a child, when she had nightmares. "I keep thinking about Nat," she said quietly, "about how he'd been planning all this. For months, I guess. Smiling at me, kissing me goodnight, and then—" Her voice shook. I kept quiet, giving her a chance to talk. Sometimes silence is better than words. "You know what the worst part is?" Audrey continued after a pause. "I loved him. I really did. Even when the first alarm bells started ringing, I made excuses. I defended him to you, to his friends, to myself. How could I have been so blind? Love often blinds you," I answered, remembering my own mistakes when I was younger, especially when you're dealing with the masters of manipulation. Audrey sighed, tugging at the edge of the blanket. "You never trusted him, did you? From the beginning. How did you figure it out?" I wondered. How do you explain that you just feel some things when you've lived among wolves long enough? How do you tell about that sixth sense you develop when your life has depended on your ability to recognize lies more than once? "He had certain traits I'd learned to recognize," I finally said, answering too smoothly, avoiding specifics when talking about the past. Stories that changed slightly every time he told them. "And you started to follow him." It wasn't a question. Audrey looked at me with a strange look, a mixture of judgment and curiosity. "Yes, I saw no point in denying the obvious. About 3 months after you were married, I hired Hennessy." "That strange man from the bookstore?" Audrey raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What is he, a private detective?" "Among other things," I answered evasively. "Hennessy has many talents and even more connections." Memories took me back to a year ago, when I'd first suspected Nat of foul play. It was a regular family get-together, a Sunday lunch I hosted once a month. Nat was talking about his new business project, something to do with real estate investments. He spoke confidently, threw around terms, mentioned some important contacts. But in his eyes, I noticed that special gleam I knew from my past life, the gleam of a con man telling a lie. The next day, I visited Hennessy on the pretext of looking for a rare book. He recognized me at once, though it had been nearly 30 years since we had last met. As a young man, Hennessy had worked on the East Coast, gathering information for people who preferred to remain in the shadows. Our paths had crossed under circumstances best not recalled. When I saw him in a small bookstore in Yucca Valley, I was shocked. He just smiled his crooked smile and said, "Small world, isn't it?" "It took me a while to approach him," I admitted to Audrey. "But when you mentioned that Nat wanted to invest your savings in some kind of get-rich-quick scheme, I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk it." Audrey listened attentively, not interrupting. There was no more judgment in her eyes, only weariness and a strange determination. "And what did the surveillance show?" I got out of bed and walked over to the dresser. From the bottom drawer, under a stack of old sweaters, I pulled out another folder, thinner than the one I'd shown Audrey the night before, but containing more important information. "Here," I held it out to her. This is the very beginning. The first Hennessy reports. Audrey opened the folder. Inside were photos dating back to last summer. Nat coming out of the bank. Nat meeting some man in a parking lot outside an abandoned mall. Nat handing the envelope to the same man 2 weeks later. Who is this man? Audrey asked, pointing at the stranger. Ernest Higgins, I replied, a small-time crook from Las Vegas, specializes in pyramid schemes and fake investment schemes. Did 3 years for fraud, got out about 5 years ago. How do you know all this? Audrey sounded amazed. I shrugged. Hennessy has a knack for finding information, and the people who have it. Audrey continued to look through the folder. There were other pictures, Nat in the company of various women, though Laurel wasn't one of them at the time. Bank statements with suspicious transactions. A copy of his real resume, a stark contrast to what he'd told Audrey about his past. God, she whispered. He'd never worked for a major construction firm, never managed projects. Everything was a lie. Not everything. I sat down next to her. His name is really Nat Vincent. At least that's the real name on his current paperwork, though he had a different name when he lived in Florida. Audrey covered her face with her hands. I married a man I didn't even know. I put my arm around her shoulders. It's not your fault. People like Nat become what they want to be. Reflect expectations. Play the role of the perfect partner. It's their talent. And their curse, Audrey added, suddenly stiff, because sooner or later the mask falls off. She slammed the folder shut and turned to me. There were no more tears in her eyes, just cold determination. You talked about a plan, a way to get my money back. Tell me more about it. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect my daughter from the sordid details, from the world I'd once fled. But the other part realized Audrey had a right to know what she was getting herself into. Before I tell you, I began gently, there are a few things you need to understand. What I'm proposing, it's not exactly legal. In fact, it's not legal at all. And if we go down this road, there's no turning back. Audrey grinned bitterly. You think I care about legality right now? That bastard stole everything I had. My future, my faith in people. If there's a way to make him pay, I'm ready. I looked closely into her eyes, looking for signs of doubt, but all I saw was pain and anger, the same emotions that had pushed me down a dangerous path long ago. All right, I nodded. But first, there's something you need to know about me, about who I used to be. I stood up and walked to the window. The quiet Yucca Valley street stretched beyond it, lit by sparse streetlights. Such a peaceful, predictable landscape, the complete opposite of my former life. My name wasn't always Beverly Prescott, I began without turning around. That name came about 35 years ago, when I moved here with your father. Before, in New York, I was known by a different name. I turned to Audrey. She sat still, absorbing every word. I worked for certain people, people who solved problems in unconventional ways. My specialty was financial information. I found accounts, transferred money, covered my tracks. You were, a criminal? Audrey said the word without judgment, just stating the fact. Technically, yes, I shrugged. I never thought of it in those terms, though. It was just a job to me, a way to survive in a cruel world. I walked back to the bed and sat down next to my daughter. Then I met your father. He didn't know about my past, at least most of it. I fell in love, wanted a different life, and certain people helped me disappear in exchange for one last favor. What favor? Audrey asked quietly. I shook my head. Some secrets are best left buried. Let's just say I helped move a substantial amount of money to a place where no one would ever find it. And in return, I got a new identity and a guarantee of safety. Audrey looked at me wide-eyed. All this time, you weren't who I thought you were. I've always been your mother, I said softly. It was never a lie. It's just, I had a past that I preferred not to talk about. She nodded slowly. And now you're suggesting that you use your old connections to get to Nat. Not exactly, I shook my head. Dash. Most of my old contacts are no longer relevant. Too much time had passed. But Hennessy, he's from the same world, and he has his own connections. People who specialize in recovering stolen goods. I reached for the phone on my bedside table. If you're sure you're ready to go all the way, I'll make the call right now. I'll set the mechanism in motion. Audrey took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into cold water. I'm sure. Make the call. I dialed Hennessy's number. Despite the late hour, he answered almost immediately. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, Beverly. There was no sleepiness in his voice. Is it urgent? My husband took all my money and ran away. I said the phrase we'd agreed to use if the plan was activated. Hennessy was quiet for a second. Got it. Here we go. Yeah. I gripped the phone tighter. Start the plan now. With those words, something changed. It was as if invisible gears were in motion, setting in motion a mechanism that couldn't be stopped. I felt a familiar adrenaline rush, a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. I'll do it, Hennessy replied briefly, and then shut down. Audrey looked at me with an unreadable expression. Now what? Now the fun part begins. I put the phone back on the nightstand. The plan consists of several stages. The first is already underway. Tracking. By morning, we'll know exactly where Nat and his girlfriend are, their route, flight numbers. How is that possible? Audrey looked puzzled. Hennessy has contacts in transportation companies, hotels, even some government agencies. People who, for a fee, provide information. I got up and started pacing the room. My thoughts organized themselves into a clear sequence of actions, just like the old days when I planned operations. The second step is a lockdown. We'll freeze their bank accounts, cancel their reservations, create paperwork problems. Hennessy knows someone who can temporarily put Nat's name on an airport security watch list, enough to hold him for a few hours. Is that really possible? Audrey looked both shocked and impressed. Anything is possible if you know the right people and are willing to pay, I shrugged. In our case, the payment will include not only money, but also certain services in the future. It's part of the game. I continued to explain the details of the plan. The third stage is confrontation. When Nat is sufficiently disoriented and frightened by the incomprehensible problems, a special person will enter the stage, a professional in the field of persuasion, as Hennessy delicately put it. Who is this person? Audrey asked. His name is Reed Tate, I answered. He's ex-military, then worked in security for several large corporations. Now let's just say he's dealing with sensitive situations. He can be very persuasive without resorting to overt violence. He threatens people. Audrey's voice has a note of concern in it. He creates situations in which people come to the right decisions, I replied diplomatically. And he has an impeccable reputation. No unnecessary action, no physical harm, unless it's necessary. That last caveat made Audrey frown, but she didn't pursue the subject. Instead, she asked, what if Nat refuses to cooperate, if he doesn't return the money? Then there's a fourth stage. My voice grew harsher. Reputation destruction. We have enough material to link Nat to several fraudulent schemes. Anonymous reports to law enforcement, articles in local newspapers, information to potential employers. We'll make sure he has to keep looking over his shoulder. I noticed Audrey flinch and added more gently, but it doesn't usually come to that. Most people agree to return the money when they realize the alternative. Audrey was silent for a moment, pondering what she'd heard. Then she looked up at me. What about Laurel? That, the woman he ran off with? I shrugged. We'll give her a choice. She can walk away empty-handed and never come near you or Nat again, or share his fate. Fair enough, Audrey nodded. There was an unfamiliar hardness in her voice. We sat there for another hour or so, discussing the details of the plan. I told her how I'd been preparing for this scenario since last spring, when Hennessy had first discovered Nat's suspicious financial transactions, how I'd been gradually gathering information, building a network of contacts, preparing escape routes. Why didn't you tell me before? Audrey asked. Before he stole the money and ran away? I sighed. Would you have believed me? Without proof, based only on suspicion and vague clues? You loved him, Audrey, and you were willing to protect him, even from your own mother. She lowered her eyes. You're right. I wouldn't have believed it. I might even have cut things off with you if you'd insisted. Exactly. Sometimes the best strategy is to wait and be ready to act when the critical moment arrives. Audrey nodded, then yawned suddenly. The tension of the last few hours was beginning to take its toll. You should get some sleep, I said. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. And you? She looked at me with concern. I'll sit up a little longer. I have some details to work out. When Audrey went to her room, I went back to the window. The night was quiet and clear, the stars hanging low over the desert. I thought about how strange life is sometimes. For 35 years, I had tried to bury my past, to become an ordinary woman, a mother, an accountant's widow. And now it was back the feeling of play, the excitement of the hunt, the satisfaction of a well-thought-out plan. I pulled an old photograph out of the dresser with a worn frame. It showed a young woman with sharp features and cold eyes. The woman I had once been. A woman whose name is now known to only a few people in the world. Welcome back, I whispered, looking at the picture. I hope you won't be gone too long. I tucked the picture back into the dresser and went to bed. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter in a story I thought was long over. And this time I would have an ally, my own daughter, who would finally see the side of her mother that had been hidden from her all her life. Before I fell asleep, I mentally checked the plan one more time. Hennessy's men had already gotten to work. By morning, we'd have complete information on Nat and Laurel. By noon, the first problems in their carefully planned escape would begin. And by evening, Reed Tate, a man who can make the most stubborn crooks admit defeat, will be on the scene. Nat Vincent doesn't know it yet, but his game is already lost. He's picked the wrong woman whose daughter can be deceived with impunity, and soon he will have to pay for that mistake. The morning in Yucca Valley began as usual, with a bright sun casting a golden glow across the desert. I woke up early, as had been my habit for years, before the alarm clock even rang. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the silence of the house and gathering my thoughts. The events of last night didn't seem like a dream. They were too real, too inescapable. The phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message from Hennessy? 8 o'clock in the morning. My store got news. I got up quietly, trying not to make any noise so as not to wake Audrey. She deserved a few hours of restful sleep after last night's turmoil. After I showered and dressed, I peeked into her room. My daughter was asleep, curled up under a blanket, just like when she was a baby. For a second I wondered, was I doing the right thing, pulling her into my world of shadows and half-truths? But there was no other way. Nat had to pay for what he'd done. In the kitchen, I left a note. Back for breakfast. Don't go anywhere. B, a simple signature, one letter, like the old days when full names were a luxury and a risk. The streets of Yucca Valley were deserted at this early hour. Only the mailman on his ancient bicycle and a couple of dog walkers disturbed the morning peace. I parked a block away from Hennessy's bookstore, another old habit, never leaving the car right outside the meeting place. The store, of course, was closed to regular customers at this early hour. I knocked on the back door with a tentative signal. 3 short, 1 long. Hennessy opened almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting outside the door. "Come on in," he nodded, letting me inside. "There's coffee." The back room of the store was strikingly different from the public area. No bookshelves or cozy reading chairs. Instead, a few monitors, racks of files, a locked metal cabinet against the far wall. The workplace of a man whose business is built on information. Hennessy poured me coffee in a crusty mug. So, the plan's in motion. My men tracked Vincent and the girl. He turned one of the monitors toward us. Several windows were open on it, photos, maps, some documents. They spent the night at the Oasis Motel on the Las Vegas Strip. Classic fugitive mistake. Stopping too close to home before the big jump. At 7 a.m., they checked out, headed to McCarran Airport. They had reservations for a flight to Cancun at 13 hours and 30 minutes. "How did you know all this?" I asked, though I had a rough idea of the answer. Hennessy grinned. "I have a man in the hotel reservation system and another at the airline, plus software that tracks credit card usage." Nat had paid with his card at the motel, despite his cunning. Small-time criminals always make that mistake. He showed me a printout of the transactions. Right here, last night. Dinner at the motel restaurant for 2. Champagne, steaks. Celebrating a successful escape, I guess. I felt a cold rage building inside of me. While my daughter was crying over losing everything, this scumbag and his mistress were enjoying an expensive dinner on her dime. "What about the account lockdown?" I asked, sipping on a strong cup of coffee. "Already working on it." Hennessy opened another window on the monitor. Jason hacked into their email, found information about a bank account in Belize, where Nat transferred most of the money. Now we're trying to block access to it through our friends in the financial industry. Jason is another name from the past. A young hacker that Hennessy took under his wing a few years ago. I'd only met him once. A quiet, skinny guy with nervous fingers and a gaze that seemed to see through computer screens. "What about Reed?" I set the mug on the table. "Is he ready?" "Reed's already in Las Vegas." Hennessy nodded. "He was on the first flight out of Los Angeles. He's on his way to McCarran Airport now, waiting for our instructions. Reed Tate is the most dangerous link in our chain. An ex-military man with impeccable manners and an icy stare. A man who could get others to do what needed to be done without resorting to overt violence. At least not without leaving visible marks." "How do we contact him?" I asked. Hennessy pointed to one of the phones on the desk. "A secure line. No names, just code phrases. Do you remember the protocol?" I nodded. "Some things you don't forget, even after decades." "Okay." He slid the folder toward me. "Here's Vincent's complete travel records for the last 48 hours. Accounts, contacts, potential safe houses. My people did a good job." I opened the folder and began to look through the contents. Hennessy was right. The information was exhaustive. Flight schedules, hotel reservations in Cancun, copies of recent transactions, even photos of Nat and Laurel at the Las Vegas airport, taken just an hour ago. "Your men are already at the airport." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Hennessy nodded. 2. Just watching for now. Waiting for a signal. I continued to study the materials, mapping out a plan of action in my head. Suddenly, my eye caught a detail in one of the documents, a confirmation of a reservation at the El Dorado Hotel in Cancun. "That's odd." I pointed to the date. The reservation was made 3 months ago. He'd been planning all this long before he started withdrawing money from the accounts. Hennessy leaned over, studying the document. "You're right. And look at the name. The reservation is in Laurel's name, not his. He'd been covering himself from the beginning." I felt anger building inside. Nat wasn't just taking advantage of an opportunity. He was deliberately planning to defraud my daughter. He'd been plotting his escape for months, thinking of every detail. There's more. Hennessy opened another folder. We found information on uh, Vincent's previous projects. Looks like your daughter isn't his first victim. He handed me several sheets of photos and brief biographies of the women. 5 names, 5 stories, remarkably similar to each other. Acquaintance, impetuous romance, marriage, financial problems, Nat's disappearance with the money. He's a serial fraudster, I muttered, looking through the files. And, by the looks of it, a pretty successful one. Until today, Hennessy said with a slight smile. He had the misfortune to get involved with your daughter. I nodded, putting the papers back in the folder. Well, it's time to get started. The first step is blocking the accounts and causing problems with the flight. Then Reed comes into play. After discussing the details with Hennessy, I returned home. Audrey was already awake and sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. I set in front of her the bag of scones I had bought on the way in. Are these cinnamon? She smiled weakly. You remember? Of course I remember. I turned on the kettle. Some things don't change. Where have you been? Audrey asked, unwrapping a scone. At Hennessy's, I decided to be frank. We set the plan in motion. Audrey looked up, concern in her eyes. Tell me more. I sat down across from her. Nat and Laurel are in Las Vegas. They're trying to fly to Cancun. We've already blocked their accounts and are preparing to intercept them at the airport. Intercept? Audrey's tense. What does that mean? Nothing dramatic. I tried to sound soothing. Just a man will talk to them, explain the situation. What person? Audrey insisted. I sighed. His name is Reed Tate. He's a specialist in handling difficult situations. What kind of expert? Audrey put the bun down. Mom, what are you getting me into? I realized it was time to be more honest. Reed is ex-military. He's now working in what you might call private justice. He'll find Nat, explain the consequences of his actions, and offer to return the stolen money. And if Nat refuses? Audrey looked at me anxiously. Then Reed will become more persistent. I chose my words carefully. But not physically violent if that's what you're worried about. No physical violence? Audrey raised her voice. You mean there'll be some other kind of violence? Psychological? Mom, that sounds awful. Audrey, I took her hand. That man stole everything from you, cheating for months, planning your escape, taking out loans in your name. Do you really think he's going to give the money back willingly if we just ask nicely? She lowered her eyes. No, but there has to be another way. A legal way. The legal way would take months, if not years. I shook my head. And by then, the money would be gone for good. Believe me, I know how the system works. Audrey was silent, pondering my words. Finally, she looked up. How do you know people like this Reed guy? Who are you really, Mom? The question I'd been waiting for and dreading at the same time. How could I explain to my daughter that her mother, a quiet, small-town widowed accountant, had once revolved in circles where people like Reed were commonplace? I told you I had a different life before, I began cautiously. In that life, I had to deal with a lot of different people. Some of them were not exactly law-abiding, but they were effective. And you were one of them? Audrey looked me straight in the eye. I held her gaze. In a way, yes. I worked in a field where the boundaries of the law were blurred. You were a criminal? Her voice shook. I was a person who survived by any means necessary, I answered. And then I met your father and wanted a different life. Audrey lowered her gaze to her hands. All this time, I thought I knew you. You know me, I squeezed her hand gently. Just not my whole story. The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. It was Hennessy. There's an update, he said without preamble. Reed went into position. The subjects have been detained by airport security for additional screening. They've already missed the flight. Good, I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. What's next? Reed plans to make contact when they leave the security area, probably suggest a meeting in a more private location. Keep me posted. I ended the call and turned to Audrey. What's going on? She asked tensely. Nat and Laurel are being held at the airport for screening, I explained. Reed is going to talk to them when they get out. What's he going to tell them? The truth, I shrugged. That we know about Nat's fraud, that we have proof, and that he has a choice to cooperate or face the consequences. Audrey rubbed the edge of her napkin nervously. What if he didn't agree? What if he tries to escape? He won't, I answered confidently. We're in control of the situation. The next few hours passed in tense anticipation. Hennessy called twice with brief updates. Nat and Laurel left the airport and headed for the nearest hotel. Reed followed them at a distance, waiting for the right moment to make contact. Around noon, a message came in. Reed in position, initiating operation. I relayed this information to Audrey, who grew increasingly anxious as time went on. What operation? She asked, pacing nervously in the kitchen. Mom, I'm beginning to think you're not telling me the whole truth. I sighed. Reed is going to talk to Nat, convince him to give the money back. And how exactly is he going to convince him? Audrey insisted. What exactly is he going to do? Before I could answer, the phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. I answered it, going into the other room. Reed speaking. The voice was calm and businesslike. I'm having difficulties. The subject refuses to dialogue. What's more, he seems to have some connections. He made a call, after which he began to behave more confidently. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? He mentioned the name Foster, said he was being protected. Foster. It's a name from my past. A man I used to work with and then run from? If Nat's really connected to him. Change of plan, I said firmly. Full pressure. Use everything you know about his past victims. If he mentions Foster again, tell him I say hi. Got it, Reed replied and disconnected. I turned back to Audrey, trying to hide my concern, but she noticed the change in my mood right away. What's wrong? She asked. Who called? Reed. I decided to be honest. There were some complications. Nat was more stubborn than we thought, and he may have some powerful friends. What kind of friends? Audrey frowned. He was always bragging about his connections, but I thought they were just empty words. I sat down next to her. Maybe not so empty. There was a possibility that Nat was connected to people from my past, people I'd rather never meet again. Audrey turned pale. Is it dangerous? Mom, what have you gotten us into? I took her hands. Listen to me. If Nat is really connected to the people I think he is, the situation is more complicated than we realize. But that doesn't mean we back off. On the contrary, we must act even more decisively now. I'm afraid, Audrey admitted, and in that moment she looked so vulnerable, so much like the little girl I used to put to bed and protect from the monsters under the bed. I won't let anyone hurt you, I said firmly, never. But you have to trust me and do what I say. She nodded, though there was still fear in her eyes. What happens now? Now we wait. I squeezed her hands, and we prepare for every eventuality. The rest of the day passed in agonizing anticipation. Hennessy didn't call again, which was unusual and disturbing. Reed hadn't been in touch either. I tried to distract Audrey by talking about neutral topics, but the anxiety grew by the hour. As darkness fell outside the windows, I decided to call Hennessy myself. It was ringing, but no one answered. It wasn't like him. Hennessy was always on the line, especially during operations. Something's wrong, I muttered, dialing the number again. Audrey watched me with growing concern. Mom? There was a knock on the door. It was sharp, insistent. We both froze. It was almost 10 p.m., too late for the usual visits. I gestured for Audrey to stay put and quietly walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a tall man in a dark suit. Reed. I opened the door and he walked in quickly, looking over my shoulder. We need to talk, he said without greeting. We're in trouble. Reed walked quickly into the living room, unbuttoning his jacket as he went. I closed the door and turned all the locks. Something in his tense posture said more about the seriousness of the situation than any words could. They know, he said, stopping in the middle of the room. Vincent had somehow gotten wind of our plan. Audrey came out of the kitchen, holding onto the door jamb as if looking for support. Who's that? She asked, looking at the stranger. Reed Tate. He introduced himself briefly, nodding slightly. I apologize for the intrusion, Ms. Prescott, but the situation requires immediate action. I gestured for him to sit down, but he shook his head. There was no time. Vincent had disappeared from the hotel as soon as we'd spoken. And worst of all, I can't get in touch with Hennessy. My insides clenched. Hennessy was my anchor in this world of shadows, the man who knew too much about my past and present. If something happened to him, tell me everything in order. I pointed Audrey to the couch, and we both sat down. Reed remained standing, occasionally looking out the window, as if expecting uninvited guests. I found them in the hotel bar as planned, he began. I sat down at a table, introduced myself as an insurance company representative investigating fraud, showed pictures of Vincent's other victims, mentioned fake IDs and loans. This is usually when people like him panic. But not Nat, I guessed. No, Reed shook his head. He listened to me calmly, even with some interest, and then he said the phrase that changed everything. Tell Miss Crow that her old ways don't work anymore. Miss Crow, a name I hadn't heard in almost 35 years, a name I thought was buried with my past life. Who is Miss Crow? Audrey asked, shifting her gaze from Reed to me. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulling back the curtain an inch. The street was empty, but that didn't mean anything. It was the name I'd been known by years ago, before I became Beverly Prescott. Audrey looked at me with widened eyes. You had another name? Not just a name. I turned to my daughter. A different life, a different personality. Reed continued, not giving Audrey time to process what she was hearing. After that, Vincent made a phone call. Speaking softly, I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught Foster's name. Shit! I rarely swore, especially in front of my daughter, but the situation called for stronger language. Does he know about my connection to Foster? Looks like it, Reed nodded. After the call, he became more confident, said he knew about my past in Special Forces, and that if I didn't back off, I'd be reminded of Kabul. Then he and the girl left. I followed them to the exit, but there was a car waiting for them. A black SUV with tinted windows. Foster's security, I muttered. He always preferred those. Who's Foster? Audrey stood up, her voice shaking with tension. Mom, what's going on? Who are you really? I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had come sooner than I expected. Allison Foster is a man I once worked for, a very powerful man, with serious connections in both the legal and illegal worlds. 35 years ago, I had access to certain information that I used, inappropriately, and then I disappeared. You stole from him? Audrey asked quietly. Not from him. I shook my head. From his clients. But in his world, it's the same thing. Reed interrupted us by raising his hand. I'm sorry, but we don't have much time. If Vincent is really connected to Foster and they know who you are, you both need to disappear. Now. And Hennessy? I turned to him. Have you tried to contact him? Several times. Reed nodded. The phone's disconnected. I sent a man to check the store, but it was empty. Signs of a struggle, scattered papers. I closed my eyes for a moment. Poor Hennessy. He knew the risks, we both did, but it was still hard to take. We can't just run, I said, opening my eyes. Not now, not when they know where to find us. We need to be proactive. I walked over to the dresser in the corner of the living room and pulled out the bottom drawer. Under a stack of old sweaters was a small box, locked with the key I always wore on a chain, along with a cross, a gift from Richard. Opening the box, I pulled out an old notebook in a worn leather cover and a small pistol, a compact but deadly Beretta Nano. Reed watched me with professional interest. Were you prepared for this turn all along? He asked. Not for this one specifically. I checked the gun's magazine. But when you have a past like mine, you should always have a backup plan. I opened my notebook and flipped to the page marked with a simple red cross. There was a phone number written there, the only one on the page, with no name or other markings. I need to make a call, I told Reed. It might make a difference. He nodded and stepped back to the window, giving me relative privacy. I dialed the number on my old push-button phone not connected to my regular number and not registered to any known name. After the fifth ringtone, the receiver was picked up. Silence. Miss Crow is bothering Mr. Bishop. I said a phrase I hadn't used in over 30 years. The silence lasted a few seconds. Then a man's voice answered. Mr. Bishop hasn't had a visitor in a long time. Tell him it's about a debt from 35 years ago. And Foster. Silence again then. Wait. A minute passed that seemed like an eternity. I wasn't sure my old contact was still alive, and even less sure he'd want to do business with me. But it was the only trump card I had left. Alice? Dash came a hoarse voice through the receiver. Old, tired, but with a note of strength I remembered well. Hello, Victor. I felt strangely relieved to hear his voice. I need some help. After a short conversation, I got what I wanted. The opportunity to meet with Foster. Victor agreed to arrange it tonight at midnight at the Desert Rose restaurant on the outskirts of town. I turned to Audrey and Reed. We have a plan. We meet with Foster at midnight. Neutral territory, security guarantees. Do you trust those guarantees? Reed asked with professional skepticism. As much as we can trust in our position? I shrugged. I have what Foster needs. He has what we need. It's business, and in business, he's always been honest. In his own way. What do we need from Foster? Audrey asked. I thought we just wanted my money back from Nat. It's not just about the money anymore. I sat down next to my daughter. It's about our safety now, if Foster knows who I am. We need assurances that he'll leave us alone. You should go alone, Reed said. I'll be around in case there's trouble. No, I shook my head. Audrey's coming with me. What? Reed and Audrey exclaimed at the same time. It's too dangerous, Reed frowned. That's exactly why she has to be with me. I looked him in the eye. Foster won't touch me as long as my daughter is around. It's not his style. He's cynical, but he has his code. I'm not afraid. Audrey straightened up. I want to be there. I want to see Nat, if he's there. Midnight was a few hours away. I used that time to prepare and explain more about my past to Audrey, about working for Foster, about how I manipulated financial flows, how I created hidden accounts and obfuscated money transfer trails. You were, a criminal? Audrey asked when I was done. Technically, yes, I shrugged, though I preferred to think of myself as a financial advisor with flexible morals. In that world, everyone was a bit of a criminal. And you stole money. It wasn't a question. I took what I thought I deserved. I met her gaze. For years of loyal service, Foster was getting rich off my talent and paying me crumbs. So one day, I decided to correct that imbalance. Audrey was silent, pondering what she'd heard. Finally, she asked, "And Dad? Did he know?" "Not everything." I shook my head. He knew I had a complicated past that I was running from. But the details? No, I never told him the whole truth. Near midnight, we drove to the meeting place. Reed drove, keeping a low profile. The plan was simple. He'd stay outside, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. I gave him one of my old pistols, despite his protests. "I thought the treaty stipulated no guns," he remarked. "Foster always has a gun." I closed the subject. It doesn't matter what the rules say. The Desert Rose was a small restaurant with an inconspicuous sign and darkened windows. A guard stood at the entrance, a tall man with a stone face and watchful eyes. "Ms. Crow?" he asked as we approached. I nodded. It was strange to respond to that name again after all these years. The guard did the standard weapons check and escorted us through the empty restaurant to a back room. It was a small office with a round table in the middle, a few chairs, and dim lighting. Already seated at the desk was a man in his 60s with impeccably styled gray hair and piercing dark eyes. Allison Foster. He hadn't changed much over the years, except for a few wrinkles and a colder gaze. Next to him stood a young man in an expensive suit, a bodyguard or an assistant, and there was another man in the room. Nat Vincent sat in the corner, pale and visibly nervous. When he saw us, his eyes widened with surprise and fear. "Alice," Foster rose, his voice sounding surprisingly soft. "Or should I call you Beverly? It's been so many years." "Alice is fine." I stopped in front of him. "For this conversation." Foster shifted his gaze to Audrey. "And this must be your daughter. The resemblance is uncanny, especially in the eyes. The same determination." "Let's cut to the chase." I lowered myself into the chair across from him, gesturing for Audrey to sit next to me. "We have a problem in common." "We do?" Foster raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" I pointed at Nat. "That man? He defrauded my daughter, stole her money, and now he's trying to use your name as a shield." Foster turned to Nat. "Is this true, Mr. Vincent?" Nat fidgeted in his chair. "Yeah, it's a complicated situation, Mr. Foster. I did take the money, but it belonged to both of us as a married couple." "He's lying," Audrey interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. "He took out loans in my name without my knowledge, stole all our savings, planned our escape for months." Foster listened with an impenetrable expression. Then he turned to me. "And you think it's my problem because—" "Because he's using your name," I replied. "Gives the impression that he's under your protection, and that, if I remember your policies correctly, is not acceptable without your explicit permission." Foster smiled slightly. "You've always had a good grasp of the rules of the game, Alice. Yes, Mr. Vincent made a mistake in using my name, but that doesn't explain why I should interfere in your family drama." I pulled out a flash drive and put it on the table. "Because I have something you're interested in. All this time. The complete archive of files I took 35 years ago." Foster's expression didn't change, but I noticed his fingers clench slightly, the only sign that my card had been played. "Let's say," he said after a pause. "What do you suggest?" "A simple exchange." I placed my hand on the flash drive. "I return the files to you. You make sure my daughter gets her money back, and we forget about each other. Forever." Foster looked at me with a long, appraising stare. "You've always been smart, Alice, but how can I be sure this is the only copy?" "You can't," I shrugged. "Just like I can't be sure you'll leave us alone after the deal. It's a matter of trust. Trust, he grinned. A funny word for a man who stole millions from me and disappeared for 35 years. I prefer to think I got what I deserved, I countered. For the years I've worked for you. Foster laughed suddenly, a short, dry laugh. You haven't changed, Alice. You still have the same insolence. All right, I'll take the deal, on one condition. What's that? I'm tense. He pointed to Nat. That man broke my rules. He used my name without authorization. That doesn't go unpunished. Nat turned even paler. Mr. Foster, I didn't mean. It was a misunderstanding. Foster raised his hand, stopping his babbling. Dash, Mr. Vincent will be joining my organization. For a set period of time, let's say 5 years, he will work to repair the damage to both my reputation and your daughter's finances. What kind of work? I asked, though I already guessed the answer. Nothing that would stain his hands with blood, if that's what you're worried about. Foster smiled a thin, unpleasant smile. Rather, the financial realm. Given his talent for deception, he could be useful in certain operations. I looked at Audrey. There was a struggle in her eyes, between a desire for justice and fear for the fate of the man she'd once loved. It's not up to me, I said, turning to my daughter. It's your husband, Audrey, your money, your decision. Audrey looked from me to Foster, then to Nat, who sat with his head down. Finally, she straightened up and looked directly at Foster. I agree, her voice was firm, but on one condition. After he's done his duty, you let him go, and you will never use him again. Foster bowed his head in a slight bow. Dash. As you wish, Miss Prescott. I'm a man of my word. One more thing, I added. What about Hennessy? Foster looked at his assistant, who nodded slightly. Mr. Hennessy is all right. A little bruised, but alive. Unfortunately, his meddling in my affairs was a little too persistent. He'll have to leave town. Where will you send him? I asked, feeling guilty for dragging an old friend into this story. He'll choose, Foster replied. He has connections all over the country. I'm sure he'll find a place. I nodded, accepting that as the best possible outcome. And Laurel, the girl who was with Nat? Ms. Townsend has already gone home. Foster smiled slightly. With some recommendations for her future behavior. I pulled a piece of paper out of my bag and handed it to Foster. Here are the bank details for the refund. The amount is at the bottom. Foster handed the paper to his assistant without even looking at it. The money will be transferred within 24 hours. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to get the files. I slid the flash drive across the table. The password is the date we first met. Do you remember? 23rd of April, 1987. Foster answered without hesitation. The day you showed up for your interview, pretending to be a Stanford graduate, and you knew right away it was a lie. I smiled slightly. But you hired me anyway. I've always valued talent more than diplomas. Foster took the flash drive and handed it to the assistant. Check this out. The young man pulled out a laptop and inserted the drive. The room was silent for a few minutes, broken only by the quiet tapping of keys. It's all here, sir, the assistant finally said. The files are authentic, as far as I can tell. Foster nodded satisfied and turned to me. Well, Alice, it seems our business is complete. An impressive return after all these years. I hope this is our last business as well. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. I want to live my life, Allison, without the ghosts of the past. We all do. He stood up too. But the past has a way of coming back, doesn't it? He held out his hand, and after a second's hesitation, I shook it. His fingers were dry and cold, like the skin of a snake. Take care of your daughter, Alice, he said quietly. She has inherited your spirit. It is a rare gift and a great responsibility. Audrey stood beside me, her face pale but determined. Nat raised his eyes to her, full of fear and pleading. Audrey, please. He began. Goodbye, Nat, she interrupted coldly. I hope you learn a lesson from all this. We left the room, accompanied by the same guard who had met us. He escorted us to the exit and closed the door once we were outside. Reed was waiting in the car, tense and ready for action. When he saw us, he exhaled a sigh of relief. Is everything okay? He asked as we got into the car. Yes, I nodded. The deal's done. The money's back. Foster's got his files. Nat. Got what he deserved. And Hennessy? Reed started the engine. He's alive. I looked out the window at the restaurant. But he'll have to leave town. We didn't talk the whole way home. Audrey sat with her arms wrapped around herself, as if she were cold despite the warm night. I didn't try to make conversation. I knew she needed time to process what had happened, to see her mother in a whole new light. Reed dropped us off at the house, and after making sure there was no danger, he said goodbye. If you need me, call me, he said, shaking my hand. I. Take care of yourself, Miss Crow, or Miss Prescott, or Ms. Prescott, whichever you prefer. Just Beverly, I replied. Alice Crow went back into the shadows, hopefully this time for good. When we entered the house, Audrey finally spoke. All this time, you've been a different person than I thought you were. I turned on the living room light and turned to my daughter. No, Audrey, I've always been your mother. That was never a lie. It's just, I had a past that I'd rather not talk about. A past that almost killed us both. There was no accusation in her voice, only weariness. A past that ended up saving you, I countered softly. Without my connections and knowledge, we never would have gotten your money back. Nat would have been gone forever. Audrey sank down on the couch, suddenly looking very small and vulnerable. Do you really think Foster will keep his word? Will give the money back? Let Nat go after 5 years? I sat next to her. Foster's a man of principles in his own way. If he's given his word, he'll keep it. The money will be returned, I'm sure of it. And as for Nat, I shrugged. 5 years is a long time, especially in Foster's world. Audrey was silent, staring at the space in front of her. Then suddenly she turned to me. Thank you, Mom, for doing all this for me. I know you took a risk. I hugged her, feeling the tension of the last few days finally let us both go. Anything for you, Audrey. Always. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Desert Rose. Slowly, life in Yucca Valley was returning to normal, though nothing was ever the same again. Not for me, not for Audrey. The promised money did arrive in my daughter's account 24 hours later, just as Foster had said it would. More than that, it was the entire amount Nat had stolen, plus interest for moral damages, as the cover letter from some anonymous financial company with an offshore address stated. Typical Foster handwriting, all legal on paper, but with an elusive tinge of criminal origin. Audrey came to live with me. Her house, technically still her and Nat's joint property, stood empty, with curtains drawn and untouched mail piling up in a drawer. She didn't want to go back there, at least not until she decided what to do next. And deciding was about a lot of things. Divorce, division of property, explaining to neighbors and friends. The story of a husband who suddenly left on business for an indefinite period of time seemed less and less convincing every day. However, in a small town like Yucca Valley, rumors spread quickly. Within a week, everyone knew that Nat Vincent had run off with some blonde and taken his wife's money. It wasn't the first such incident in the town's history, and fortunately for Audrey, most of the residents expressed sympathy for her rather than condemnation. Tuesday morning began as usual. I was making breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, just like Audrey had loved as a child. She came into the kitchen, already dressed for work, her hair damp from her shower. Good morning. I set a plate in front of her. How did you sleep? Not bad, she smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. Nat was dreaming again. I didn't ask about the details of the dream. Over the past weeks, we had set some boundaries in our conversations. Audrey told me what she wanted to tell me. I didn't push. It worked for both of us. Reed called today, I said, pouring coffee. He said hi. Audrey looked up. Did he find out anything? Oh, them? I knew who she was asking about. After that night at the restaurant, we'd had no direct contact with either Foster or Nat, but Reed, with his connections, has kept his hand in, periodically giving us scant news. Nat works for one of Foster's companies in Los Angeles. I sat down across from my daughter. In the finance department, as promised. He lives in a corporate apartment under the supervision of Foster's people. Supervised, Audrey grinned bitterly. That's what they call it now? I shrugged. He got what he deserved, Audrey. 5 years in Foster's service isn't the worst punishment, considering the circumstances. I know, she sipped her coffee. It's just, sometimes I wonder how things could have turned out differently. If I'd been more careful, if I'd noticed the signs. Don't blame yourself, I interrupted her gently. Nat was a professional at what he did. He'd been deceiving women for years, and no one saw through him. Except you, Audrey looked me in the eye. You figured him out right away. I had an advantage, I smiled slightly. Experience with people like him. It was another sensitive subject between us. My past, my true identity. Audrey had asked a lot of questions after that night, and I'd answered as honestly as I could. But some parts of the Alice Crow story will forever remain in the shadows. Didn't you ever want to go back? Audrey suddenly asked. To that life, to the real me. I wondered. It was a profound question, one that went to the heart of my transformation, from Alice to Beverly. Which one was the real one? Was there a choice between them? No, I finally answered. That life. It was exciting, yes. Adrenaline, power, money. But there was no room for what really mattered. My family. For you. Audrey nodded, accepting the answer. We finished breakfast in comfortable silence, each in our own thoughts. As she was about to leave for work, I handed her an envelope. What's this? She asked, looking at the heavy paper, unmarked and unaddressed. From Hennessy, I smiled, seeing her surprise. He sent it yesterday through an intermediary. Read it when you're alone. After Audrey left, I went about my daily business. Working in the Rogers and Associates office was a thing of the past. I quit a week after the events with Foster. The official version for Mr. Rogers was the need to care for his daughter after the family drama. The real reason was precautionary. Although I believed Foster would keep his word and leave us alone, old habits die hard. Better to become less conspicuous for a while. Fortunately, I had savings. Not only Beverly Prescott's legal pension, but also an untouched portion of the money from that other life. I'd always been careful, never spending more than my official accountant's income allowed. Now that prudence was paying off, in the afternoon I went shopping. Yucca Valley is a small town, and a trip to the supermarket inevitably turns into a series of meetings with acquaintances. Elaine Draper, the mayor's secretary, intercepted me at the cereal shelf. Beverly, she exclaimed with exaggerated enthusiasm. How are you? How's Audrey? I gave her a strained smile. I'm fine, thank you. It's a terrible story with that husband of hers. Elaine lowered her voice to a confidential whisper. It's all everyone's talking about. Running off with another woman, stealing money. It's a nightmare. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Yeah, it's a tough time for Audrey. And you haven't heard from him? Elaine stepped forward, clearly hoping for more gossip. No. I grabbed a bag of rice from the shelf. I'm sorry, Elaine, but I have a lot of shopping to do. She looked disappointed, but backed off. Sure, sure, sure. Say hi to Audrey and tell her that if she needs help, legal or otherwise, my cousin is an excellent divorce attorney. I thanked her and hurried on to the next department. Conversations like this have been repeated with enviable regularity over the past few weeks. Sympathy mixed with morbid curiosity is a typical small town reaction to someone else's troubles. When I returned home, I found an unexpected guest. Sitting on the porch was Mr. Brooks, my neighbor, with a small box in his hands. Dash, dash, Mr. Brooks, I nodded as I approached the house. To what do I owe the honor? The old man stood up, leaning on his cane. Despite his 81 years, he stood up straight with a military bearing. Dash, Mrs. Prescott. He handed me a box. This was delivered to my house by mistake, for your daughter. I took the box, feeling slightly uneasy. No sender's name, no return address. Thank you for bringing it. I tried to hide my anxiety. Dash, would you like to come in for a cup of tea? He shook his head. Thank you, but I have to go. Cacti don't water themselves. When Mr. Brooks left, I examined the box carefully without opening it. Medium size, lightweight, no sound when shaken. After some hesitation, I decided to open it, just in case the contents were dangerous. Inside was a book, an antique leather-bound edition of Alice in Wonderland, and a note, "Some stories deserve a good ending. E.F. Allison Foster." I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just a gift, it was a message, a reminder that he knew where we lived, that our arrangement held only on his word. I tucked the book and the note back into the box and hid it in the closet. I'll decide later whether to show it to Audrey. In the evening, when my daughter returned from work, I noticed a change in her mood. She seemed animated, almost enthusiastic, for the first time in many days. Good news? I asked as we sat down to dinner. Audrey smiled, sincerely this time. I read Hennessy's letter. He's fine, settled in Portland. Opened up a rare bookstore there, too. I'm glad to hear that. I was actually relieved. Hennessy was one of the few people connecting me to the past, a kind of memory anchor. What else does he write? That he would never forget old friends. Audrey sipped wine from her glass. And that if we ever need a safe haven, his doors are always open. I nodded. Typical Hennessy even in exile. He thinks of others. One more thing, Audrey continued, looking me in the eye. I filed for divorce. Today. I didn't hide my surprise. So soon? I thought you were still mulling it over. There's nothing to consider. She shook her head firmly. This marriage was a mistake from the start. And the sooner I close this chapter, the better. What about... I paused, searching for words. The situation with nature. His absence could complicate things. Already taken care of. Audrey smiled slightly, and in that smile I was surprised to recognize my younger self. The same confidence, the same cold calculation. The documents will be delivered to the office of the company where he now works, through certain channels. I think Mr. Foster will ensure his cooperation. I looked at my daughter carefully. Did you contact Foster? Directly? Not exactly. She shrugged with casual nonchalance. Reed helped me relay the message through the right people. An uneasiness tugged at my heartstrings. Audrey, it's dangerous. Foster is not a man to be toyed with. I'm not gambling. She set her fork aside. I'm just finishing what Nat started. He got me into this circle, connected me to these people. Now I'm using those same connections to free myself. There was logic in what she was saying, but I was still disturbed by this new calculating way Audrey approached the situation. It was as if part of my dark nature had been passed on to her, awakened by the circumstances. Just be careful. I covered her hand with mine. People like Foster, They never do favors for nothing. There's always a price. I know, she met my gaze. I'm Alice Crow's daughter, remember? Something must have been passed down to me by inheritance. There was no reproach in her words, more a strange pride. It touched and frightened me at the same time. After dinner, we moved into the living room with cups of tea. Audrey sat in the corner of the sofa with her legs tucked under her, just like when we used to read together as children before bedtime. I've been thinking about what happens next, she said after a long silence. About us, about you, and what conclusions did you come to? I'd been waiting for this conversation, knowing it was inevitable. We can't just go back to the way things were. Audrey looked into her cup, as if searching for answers. Too much has changed. I've learned too much. About her husband or about your mother? The question was sharper than I'd intended. Both, she looked up. But most of all, about myself. That I could be stronger than I thought. That I could make tough decisions when I needed to. I knew what she meant. The decision to hand Nat Foster over to her, albeit indirectly, through my consent, was not an easy one. It meant knowingly sending the man she had once loved into the hands of a dangerous and unscrupulous businessman, even if Nat deserved it for his actions. You've always been strong, Audrey, I said softly. It's just that circumstances haven't required you to show it fully. Until now, she nodded. And you know what the strangest thing is? I don't feel guilty. For Nat, for what happened to him. He betrayed me, stole my money, my dreams, and now he's paying for it. That's, fair. The same cold judgment in her voice that had once helped me survive in Foster's world. I had mixed feelings, pride in my daughter's fortitude, and fear that that fortitude might lead her down the same dark path I had once traveled. Justice is not always a comfort, I said. Sometimes revenge leaves nothing but emptiness. That's not revenge, Audrey shook her head. Or not just revenge. It's protection. I'm protecting myself, my future. And by the way, she suddenly changed her tone to a lighter one. I'm thinking of going back to painting. Seriously, that sudden change of subject took me by surprise. It did? I'm glad. You've always been talented. Nat said it was a waste of time. She grinned bitterly. That my abstractions were useless. Maybe he was right about the commercial side, but I realize now that I wasn't painting to sell. I was painting for me. I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for my daughter. I saw in this desire to return to creativity a good sign, a desire to heal, to move on. Your old studio is still there in the house, I remarked. All your paints, your canvases. Yes, she nodded thoughtfully. But I'm not sure I want to go back there. Too many memories. I'm thinking of selling the house when the divorce is finalized. Make a fresh start. You could always stay here, I paused. Or, we could move, together, to another city, another state, if you want to put the past behind you completely. Audrey looked at me with surprise. You'd leave Yucca Valley? After all these years? It's just a place, I shrugged. It's the people that matter, not the walls. She considered my words, clearly caught off guard by the suggestion. I don't know, Mom. It's a big decision. I need to think about it. Sure, I nodded. There's no rush. Just know that this option exists. Later, when Audrey went to bed, I stayed in the living room thinking about our conversation, about how things had changed between us in those 3 weeks. In a strange way, revealing my true identity, my past, had brought us closer together. It was as if an invisible wall built of reticence and secrets had fallen between us. And yet I couldn't shake the anxiety. The way Audrey talked about Nat, about her feelings, or rather her lack thereof, reminded me of myself when I was younger. That coldness, that ability to shut out emotion, that made me effective in Foster's world. but robbed me of something important in human terms. I didn't want that fate for my daughter. I didn't want her to learn to close her heart like I did. But did I have the right to interfere? Audrey was a grown woman who had been through a serious betrayal. Her reaction was natural, protective. Maybe that was the vicious cycle of our family. This ability to withdraw, to shut down, to protect herself at all costs. My mother was the same way, cold, calculating, always keeping her distance. I had inherited that trait and apparently passed it on to Audrey, though I tried my best to be a different mother. I remembered Foster's strange gift of an Alice in Wonderland book. Perhaps there was some symbolism in it. Alice falling down the rabbit hole into another world where nothing was what it seemed. Isn't that what happened to my daughter? Didn't she fall down the rabbit hole of my past, discovering that her mother was not at all what she had seemed all those years ago? I decided I would show her the book, tomorrow. It would be a test of sorts to see how she would react to this gesture of Foster's, whether she'll recognize the threat behind the apparent courtesy, or worse, whether she'll take it as some kind of approval, a recognition from a man whose recognition is not worth seeking. The next morning, I woke up with a sense that something had changed. Looking out the window, I saw Reed's car parked across the street. He was sitting behind the wheel, clearly watching the house. That couldn't be a good sign. I quickly got dressed and went out onto the porch. Reed spotted me and got out of the car, heading toward the house. "What's wrong?" I asked without preamble as he approached. "Probably nothing." His face was tense. "But I don't like some of the rumors I'm hearing about Foster and his interest in your daughter." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of interest? Professional?" Reed lowered his voice, even though there was no one around. He was impressed with the way she'd handled herself during your meeting. Her coolness. Word is, he offered her a job after Vincent completes his term. I froze. It was the worst possible outcome. Foster dragging my daughter into his world, the same world I'd struggled to escape from. Audrey said yes? My voice sounded foreign. "I don't know." Reed shook his head. "But the very fact that Foster is interested in her? It's not good, Beverly. You know better than I do what he's like." I nodded, feverishly contemplating the situation. "Thank you for the warning. I'll talk to her." Reed nodded and after a brief goodbye, left. I went back into the house, feeling my anxiety growing by the minute. Audrey was still asleep. She'd been waking late a lot lately, tormented by restless dreams. I didn't bother to wake her. Instead, I pulled a box of the book from Foster out of the closet and placed it on the kitchen table. It would be part of our conversation when she woke up. I sat at the table with a cup of coffee, looking at the box and pondering the peculiar irony of the situation. All my life I'd tried to protect my daughter from my past, from the world of Foster and his kind, and now, because of Nat's betrayal, she found herself on the threshold of that world, perhaps even with a desire to enter it. The cycles repeat themselves. Mother, daughter, daughter again, each with her own story of pain and betrayal, each finding her own way to protect herself. My mother shut herself off from the world. I escaped and created a new identity. Audrey? What would Audrey choose? I didn't know the answer. But I was sure of one thing. I would do everything I could to keep her from my mistakes, even if it meant going back to being Alice Crow and confronting Foster face to face. It would be a dangerous path with an uncertain outcome. But for my daughter's sake, I was willing to risk everything, even the quiet life I'd spent so long building in Yucca Valley. After all, isn't that what motherhood is all about? To protect your children at all costs, even if the price is your own safety, your own well-being, even if you have to go back to something you've spent your whole life running away from. I heard Audrey's footsteps on the stairs and straightened up, preparing for a difficult conversation. to try to break the vicious cycle that seemed to be the curse of the women in our family. Perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps we can find another way. Not running away like I did, not shutting down like my mother, and not hardening ourselves like Audrey risked doing. A way where we can be strong without becoming cold, to protect yourself without losing your capacity for compassion, to love without fear of betrayal. I didn't know if it was possible, but I was willing to try, for Audrey, for both of us,